want to talk to you today on how to receive a return on failure. And yes, you heard me right. How to receive a return on failure. It's highly probable that you've never heard anybody talk on that subject. I can promise you, until I developed this teaching myself, I never heard anybody talk about getting a return on failure. I've heard people talk about getting an ROI, a return on investment. I've heard people talk about an ROT, a return on time. But a return on failure? How interesting this is, especially in a culture and a climate that basically we fear failure and we don't want to be a part of failure. We don't want to be associated with failure. But I will promise you that if you'll stay with me in this lesson, there is much to learn. There is much to apply so that you can really receive a return on your failure. So first of all, let's just talk about it. First, nobody likes failure. At least when I say nobody likes failure, I've never met anybody that likes failure. I've never run into a person and I've asked them, how's your day going? And have them say, oh my gosh, I've had an incredible day. I have failed 3 times today, and I just get such energy out of my losses and my misses and my hurts and my mistakes. Oh, I've never heard anybody talk about it. Have you? Really? Really? You see, I have come to conclusion that everybody fails, but no one likes it. And that's why I think this subject is so important. I don't like failure. I don't think you do either. And yet, it's such a part of our lives. When I was a young leader in my 30s in America, I was finding out that there were some things that there were some risk I wasn't taking. That as a young entrepreneur, there are times when I just didn't step out, and the reason was I didn't want to fail because I was young, and I thought if I fail, people will look at me and they'll say, well, he's a young leader. He's not very good. And so failure and the fear of failure had a little bit of grip on me, and it had a tendency to hold me back. But I had a wonderful mentor named Robert Schuller, and he came into my life in my early 30s, and we talked about this and over dinner one night, and he said to me, John, I'm going to give you a question to ask yourself, and if you'll ask yourself this question, I think you'll do more attempts in your projects. And I said, well, great, what's the question? And the question he gave me was a simple one, and here it is. He said, John, what would you attempt? What would you attempt to do if you knew you wouldn't fail? And when he asked me that question, what would I attempt to do if I knew I wouldn't fail? Honestly, I thought, well, there's a lot of things I would attempt to do if I knew that I wasn't going to fail. And so I started using that question as a young leader, and it really helped me for about a year, just start new things, try new things. And every time I get to it, I said, well, what would I attempt if I knew I wouldn't fail? And well, I'm going to attempt this. And I jumped into the project. Now, it really wasn't a good question. When he asked me to ask myself the question, what would you attempt to do if you knew you wouldn't fail? It's a bad question because it's not a question of reality. There's no such project that you can go into that you can say to yourself with integrity, I know I won't fail. Really? I've never had any kind of new endeavor that kind of excluded failure as a possibility. So it wasn't a good question because it wasn't a truthful question. It wasn't a realistic question. And so I would jump in with eagerness. Well, what would I attempt to do if I knew I wouldn't fail, only to jump in and fail? And then I thought, now what would I do? So today I'm going to give you another question. This is a good question. I have encouraged people to ask this question thousands of times, and I encourage you to do it now. And here it is. What would you attempt to do if you knew that failure could give you a positive return? In other words, you're getting ready to start a new project. What would you attempt to do in starting that project if you knew that when you failed, it would have a positive return in your life. Not if you failed, because you will fail. I fail, you fail, we all fail. And truthfully, we fail continually. So the question, what would you attempt to do if you knew that when you failed, you would get, instead of a negative return out of this, you would get a positive return? Now, that is the question I want you to ask. And if you'll ask that question today as I do this lesson, I promise you, you are on the path to getting a return, a positive return on your failure. Now, I've written a lot about failure. I talk a lot about failure. Somebody asked me one time why that was so, and I said it's because I've had a lot of failures in my life. I've had a lot of losses. Several years ago, I wrote a book called Failing Forward. It's a great book. Literally, it's sold over 1 million copies. And it's a book on how to fail successfully. But let me tell you the story behind the writing of that book. Margaret and I were getting ready to go to Norway to see the fjords of Norway. We're going to go on a cruise. And a couple weeks before that cruise, I was looking at my calendar kind of carefully, and I realized that it was a 2-week cruise to see the fjords of Norway. And I thought, man, that's a long time to see the fjords of Norway. And wow, my gosh, I wish we could, make it shorter. So I sat down with Margaret. We talked about, could we reduce the 2-week cruise to a 1-week cruise? And we had a good conversation. And then a couple weeks later, we took off to do our 2-week cruise to see the fjords of Norway. You see, anybody that doesn't believe in compromise hasn't stayed married very long. And Margaret and I have been married for 53 years, okay? But we made a deal. If we're going to be 2 weeks looking at the fjords of Norway, I asked her, well, at least, could I write a book? Is that okay? I would love to write a book, and I wanted to write the book Failing Forward. And she said yes. And so we had this beautiful suite right up front of the ship, all glass, so we could see everything. I had a table, I had a legal pad, I had my 4-color pen. That's yes. I write my books by hand on a 4-color pen. And so I'm sitting there at my table and I'm writing the book Failing Forward as this ship goes into these inlets to show us the fjords of Norway. And every once in a while, over the speaker system, there would be a voice and say, now look to your left, there's a fjord here. And I'd stop writing and I'd look over there, and sure enough, wow, yeah, there was a fjord. I'd look at it for a moment, I'd say, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Just amazing. Wow. Incredible. And then I go back to writing my book. A little later, maybe we'd go over and pull up to another fjord, and this fjord would be on the right side of the ship, and I'd stop writing, and I'd look at that fjord. I said, boy, Margaret, look at that fjord. And then, I'd look at that fjord kind of closely, and then I'd look back at the other fjord that I had just previously seen. Wow. Honey, that fjord looks just like that fjord. And I'm writing my book. 2-week cruise is over. I've written Failing Forward. It's on 220 legal pages, held together with a rubber band. And Margaret is walking off of the ship, and book is now written, and we're about halfway off the ship, and she stops and she turns around and said, John, she said, I just want you to know, I really love the book. And I said, well, thank you, honey. Thank you very much. I said, what did you like so much about it? Oh, she said, you were so open and honest about your failures. And almost every page, you just say, well, I did that and it didn't work out. And I tried that, and wow, that was a mess up. She said the reader is going to love this book because every page you're just very honest, authentic. You just talk about your failures. She said they're just going to they're going to feel so close to you. I said, well, thank you very much. And then she said, but there's only one problem with the book. I said, well, hey, what could that be? And she smiled real big. She said, you didn't put all your failures in the book. You didn't get them all in. And then she started laughing, and she said, I see a series coming on, Failure 101, 201, 301. And we laughed about that day and continually since that time, and she was right. I had more failure books to write. A few years later, I wrote a book called Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn. It's all about the fact that the question is not, did you fail? The question is, did you learn from the failure? And now I'm teaching on how to receive a return on failure, which this will be a future book, no doubt, also. So what I'm wanting you to know as we start this simple lesson on how to receive a return on failure, I've talked a lot about failure, and I think I understand it. And my goal is this. At the end of this lesson, this teaching, I'm hoping that you will embrace failure more than you're embarrassed by it. So many people, they get embarrassed by their failure. I want you to embrace it. So how do you and I receive a return on failure? Number one, keep failure and success together. This is very important. I have had for 40 years what I call learning lunches. Now, a learning lunch is where I sit down with somebody, I take them to lunch, I buy their lunch. And this person I take out, they're better than me, bigger than me, faster than me, smarter than me, more successful than me. And I'm having the lunch to learn from them. I want them to teach me. So we go to a nice restaurant and I buy their lunch. I don't even eat lunch. I just literally take notes and ask questions. And I ask 7 questions. And I just find that the questions I ask do be very helpful in helping me to grow and learn and improve my life because of the person that I'm having lunch with. So one of the questions I ask that just is so helpful is I look at them and I ask, talk to me about what's the most important lesson that you've ever learned in your life. And they began to talk to me about some very important lesson they learned in life. And now that I've had hundreds of these lunches with hundreds of different people, I have come to a startling conclusion. Every time I ask a person, what's the most important lesson you've ever learned in your life, they always tell me about something they've learned that includes a failure in their life. There was a loss. I don't know, maybe there was the death of a loved one, or perhaps it was the breakup of a marriage. Maybe, maybe they went bankrupt in their business. But they always talk about a loss, a problem, a miss, a failure, a mistake. And every time when I say, what's the most important lessons you ever learned in your life? They talk about some failure that they've had and how they learned from that failure and how they overcame that failure. Now, this is huge. So as I review all the questions I've asked about important lessons, and here are the answers which include some kind of a loss, some kind of a failure, I have come to the conclusion, if you want to return on your failure, you need to keep failure and success right together. They belong together. But what do? We separate them. We put success over here, and we put failure way over here, and we tell people now really succeed, be successful. And, don't fail. Okay, do it right. And we separate success and failure, and that's not the way life is. Nobody has ever looked at you in their life and said, for several years, all I did was succeed, and then for a few years, all I did was ever fail. No one lives a life where success and failure are separated, and yet that's exactly what we're taught to do. I'm saying, forget it, put them back together. Keep success and failure together. They belong together. They need each other. Let me explain. Bill Gates is the one who said success is a lousy teacher. It causes people to think they can't lose. What he was basically saying is, you show me success without failure, and I'll show you a person that's in trouble. So we need to keep success and failure together because let's say, for example, I'm just on a success roll and I'm just hitting the ball and doing really good and I'm succeeding. I need to keep failure close to me. I need to remember what failure looks like. I need to embrace failure when it happens during my role of success. I need to keep failure close to me because in my success, if I remember my failures, it teaches me humility. And humility is the number one quality needed in a leader's life because humility makes me teachable, makes you teachable. When we're humble, we don't think we have all the answers. There's a lack of arrogance in our life and this kind of been there, done that mindset that's not healthy at all. So in my success, I need to keep failure close because it teaches me humility. And when I'm failing a lot, it's just not, I'm in the ditch. I'm not having a lot of good days right now. When I'm failing, I need to keep success close to my failures because when I remember my successes, it gives me resiliency. And resilience allows me to pick myself up and get out of that ditch and get back on the road and do it again. So I encourage you, you gotta keep them together. If you want to return on your failure, keep success and failure together. That's number one. Number two, if you want to get a return on your failure, number two, understand the difference between good misses and bad misses, because there is a difference. And I don't want you to miss this. Again, I'm just writing this as I teach it, and so I'm still learning myself and growing myself. But here's what I know. There's such a thing as a good miss, and there's such a thing as a bad miss. That's why in my book on failing forward, why did I call it failing forward? What I was doing is I was giving you a picture of a good miss. Yes, I didn't hit it, but I failed forward. I got a little closer to it. Just like a bad miss would be failing backward. Now I'm further from my goal than I ever had imagined. So I have to understand the difference between a good miss and a bad miss, because good misses are good. And it's possible for me to have several good misses until I really get close enough to get that hit and succeed the way that I want to. It's never possible for me to have bad misses and finally succeed. So I've got to know the difference, understand them, embrace the good misses, get rid of the bad misses. Let me explain to you just what I mean when I say good miss, bad miss. Okay, here's a good miss. I tried something and it didn't work, but I learned from it, and so I made adjustments. You see, in good misses, I make adjustments. I make corrections. I tweak it. I have a wonderful friend, Tom Watson, who was one of the 10 greatest golfers ever, and we were playing golf one day, and Tom has won, I think, over 50 PGA tournaments. He said, John, there are only 5 tournaments that I won that on Thursday when the tournament began, goes 4 days through Sunday. There were only 5 tournaments that I won that on day one I just thought, I'm going to win. My swing is so smooth, it's so grooved, my game is so at the top of what I should be. I'm going to win. He said all the rest of my wins, by vast the majority of them, 90% of them, I had to adjust my swing during the tournament. Something went wrong, and all of a sudden I wasn't smooth, and I was not I just wouldn't, and I'd have to go to the practice. I have to go to the practice range after I played all day, and I'd have to work on my swing. He said, in most of my victories, I adjusted myself to victory. I had to make corrections. I had to make some improvements. I had to tweak myself. You see, a good miss is when I make adjustments. Now, hang on. And a bad miss is when I make excuses. Yeah, that's a bad miss. Wow. When I start making excuses for why I haven't, couldn't, shouldn't, didn't, I'm in trouble. And by the way, a real good excuse is a real bad excuse. You know that, don't you? That when you have a good excuse by why you haven't done something, it's so good you believe it and you accept it, and other people believe it and they accept it. So now you live in the world of excuses instead of adjustments, and you make a series of bad misses because you're excusing yourself all this time instead of adjusting yourself. So let me see if I can do a decent job teaching you about good misses, bad misses, and the whole process. Portia Nelson wrote a beautiful piece. I'm going to read it to you. It's going to take me 2 minutes, called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. And I'm convinced that Portia Nelson really understood the difference between a good miss and a bad miss. So let me read it to you. And as I read it to you, ask yourself at the end of each little chapter, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? Here we go. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Now, question, is that a good miss or is that a bad miss? Now, let me help you. Let me give you a hint. Whenever you have your first failure, you don't know whether it was a good miss or bad miss immediately, because it's going to be your response to the failure that's going to determine if it was a good or if it was a bad miss. So chapter 1, we just know that there was a loss, a failure, a miss, but we're not sure whether it was good or bad. So let's go to chapter 2. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Was that a good miss or is that a bad miss? Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault, and I get out immediately. Good miss, bad miss. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Good miss, bad miss. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. That's a good miss. It's a good miss because a change happened. An adjustment was made. I walk down another street. Elon Musk said the difference in a startup that is successful and one that is not is that the successful startup recognizes mistakes and fixes them quickly, and the unsuccessful one tries to avoid mistakes altogether. So, if you want to get a return on your failure, we've learned 2 things already. We've learned that we're to understand the differences between good misses and bad misses, that we're to keep failure and success together. Let's go to number 3. If you want to return on your failure, embrace hard. Embrace hard. There's a book I would encourage you to read. It's a classic book. It's written by psychiatrist Scott Peck. It's called The Road Less Traveled. Literally, when I was young, I read this book and it had a profound impression upon my life. In the book, The Road Less Traveled, Scott Peck opens up the book with this sentence. In fact, the first 3 words describe the book. Here's what he says: life is difficult. Scott Peck says that this is one of the greatest truths that we can ever learn, that life is difficult. And he says also, if we learn that life is difficult and we embrace it, he said, what we'll discover is we live much more effectively. In fact, what we discover is once we embrace that life is difficult, it's not as difficult. Why is it not as difficult? Because we now have embraced that this is the way life is. The way I explain it to people all the time is I use this visual. Everything worthwhile is uphill. Everything. All of your dreams, they're uphill. There is no such thing as you having a downhill dream. If you're trying to build a business, it's all uphill. There's never been such a thing as coasting your way to success. There's never been a book written on accidental accomplishment. Everything worthwhile is uphill. It's all uphill. Wow. Embrace hard. That's why we need to be intentional. The only way that you climb uphill is to be intentional in climbing. You didn't accidentally get there. So to receive a return on failure, one of the most important things we can do is just basically say, life is hard. And the moment that we embrace hard and know that life is difficult, we expect losses, we expect misses, we expect failures. Of course we do. I do, you do, we all do. When I was in Milan with you, I shared with you that a cute little story. I was teaching a leadership conference one day, and a couple thousand people were there, and they paid a lot of money to come, and there was a lot of laughter. It was just a great environment. And it's the afternoon break, and I'm signing books, a long line, and I'm meeting people. And this kid comes up to me, all excited. And he said, I love this seminar. I love what's happening. He said, I made a decision. I said, well, what is it? He said, I decided I want to do what you do. I said, I love that. Congratulations. Congratulations. He is just on cloud 9. I looked at him. I said, do you mind if I asked you a question? He said, no, not at all. I said, I got it that you'd like to do what I do. I got that. The question is, would you like to do what I did so you can do what I do? You see me today with success, but there's been an awful lot of failures and losses and misses and practices. I wasn't this good in the beginning. Would you like to do what I did? People, when I talk about communication, they say, John, you're such an incredible communicator. Well, I think I am, but let me ask you a question. How many times do you have to be a great communicator before you're a great communicator? I mean, I didn't become a great communicator the first time I tried this. I've spoken over 13,000 times. Think about it. If I can't communicate effectively after 13,000 times, I'm in deep weeds. I chose the wrong profession. You see, today I can communicate with ease and people love it. But I've done it 13,000 times. You see, I know you want to do what I do, but do you want to did the 13,000 times? That's the question. My books have sold millions and millions and millions of copies. But I didn't even have a bestseller until my 16th book. I had to write 15 books before I got a bestseller. I know you'd like to be a bestseller. I got that. I know you want to do what I do, but would you like to do what I did? I wrote an awful lot of words before I became a bestseller. You see, the did is the problem. We all want to do what great people do, but we don't want to did what great people did so that they could do what they do. You see, and if you don't do the did, In America, I tell people all the time, if you don't do the did, you're in deep doo-doo. That's a fact. So if you want to return on failure, you want to keep failure and success together, you want to understand the difference between a good miss and a bad miss, and you want to just embrace hard because life is hard. There's nothing easy about life. Once you accept that, though, life becomes easier. Number 4, if you want to be highly successful, you need to anticipate failure. Now, that sounds negative. That's kind of a downer. Wow, I mean, John, what do you mean? I have to anticipate failure. That's kind of a negative way to live your life. No, I don't mean that at all. What I want you to know is if you're going to do anything great, you're going to have a lot of failure. It comes with the package. So you anticipate failure not with a spirit of dread. You anticipate failure with a spirit of reality. It's just going to happen. And what happens is anticipation influences preparation. And the value of anticipating failure is it gets us ready for potential failures. When I wrote the book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, it became a bestseller immediately. We did a book tour in America. We had a plane, and we literally spoke at 3 different cities every day for a week. So we did 21 cities in a week, talking about the 21 laws. And so we started on the East Coast and we worked our way clear out to California, the West Coast. We were flying back after that book tour and we were coming into Atlanta. And as the plane was getting ready to land, we were about 50 feet from above the runway. We hit a wind shear and the plane just dropped immediately to the runway. And when we touched down at the runway, I knew we were in trouble because we didn't touch down straight. We touched down sideways, and I knew that that plane was going to flip. But what was amazing is the moment we touched down wrong, that pilot put the nose of that plane back up in the air, and we got back up in the air. Wow, so close. And we circled the field a couple times. We came down, landed safely. When I got off the plane, I kissed the ground. And when the pilot got off the plane, I kissed the pilot. And I said, that was amazing. Wow. That was incredible. How did you do that? How did you get that plane so quickly? How did you make that decision to get that plane up in the air so quickly? And here's what he said. I didn't make that decision quickly. I made that decision 20 years ago. He said, when I decided to become a pilot, I asked myself, what could go wrong when I fly? And I listed all the problems that you could have in a plane. And with every anticipated failure and problem, I put out an answer of how I would handle that situation. What am I going to do? What am I going to do if the plane hits wrong on the runway? Well, I'm going to get the plane back up in the air because there's a lot more give and take in the air than there is on the ground. Oh, of course there is. Hello. You see, he anticipated the failure, and that in itself allowed him to make that decision. There's something incredible about us anticipating the possibility of losses and misses that allows us to really improve and get better. Let me explain it this way. I have a passion. You could call it a bucket list. I would like to see transformation happen in a country, and I'd like to be catalytic in seeing that happen. Now, that isn't going to be easy. It hasn't happened for a couple hundred years, but I believe it can happen. So through our nonprofit organization, Equip and the John Maxwell Leadership Foundation, we go into countries to teach good values in small groups in order to help people learn those good values, live those good values, and become more valuable to themselves and others, and therefore bring transformation to their home, their family, their community, and who knows, maybe their country. So when I talk to people about my bucket list of seeing in my lifetime, through the efforts of our players, our team, a country transformed. They look at me and say, wow, that's a huge goal. Do you think it'll happen? And I think what I say to them really surprises them. I look at them and say, well, I want it to happen, but I'm not certain it will. And then they kind of sit back and thought, wow, you're taking a journey, trying to do something that you may not even be able to accomplish. And I tell them, that's okay. That doesn't bother me because I'm trying to accomplish something really big. So what I've done is I do what I call mental preparation for a project that is huge. And the mental preparation consists of me thinking and committing to do three things. First of all, I will keep moving. When I'm in a big project and things aren't going well, the tendency for people to do is to quit. When COVID happened, what had happened? Everybody stopped. What's happening? How long will this last? What does this mean to me? The tendency is whenever we're into something, quote, over our heads, we have a tendency to stop. And I say, no, I will keep moving. And the reason I will keep moving is there's such a thing as action attraction. And action attraction simply says, if I am taking action, if I am moving on my purpose and my mission in life, it's in my movement that I attract people and resources and opportunities to me. It's not while I'm stopped. Opportunities don't come to a person that's not moving. It's action attraction. So I've made because I anticipate failure in a big project. I've made a choice, a conscious choice to keep moving. And I not only made that conscious choice to keep moving, I made the conscious choice that I will keep adjusting. As I learn what doesn't work, I'm not going to stop. I just adjust myself. I do what Tom Watson does. I adjust my way to victory. I wrote a book a few years ago called Leadership. It was a very popular book and very popular, especially during COVID, because it's all about pivoting. How do you pivot? How do you adjust? How do you turn? How do you change? Wow. Those are great questions. So I've made a decision, again, because I anticipate in the projects that are so big that there'll be a great amount of losses and misses and failures. So I've made the mental preparation. I will keep moving and I will keep adjusting. And thirdly, I will keep believing. Even when other people, they don't believe in me, that's okay. In fact, let me say to them, you don't have to believe in me, but you have to believe that I believe in me. And that's the key. To get a return on failure, you just have to overcome a lot, but that's okay because in the process of overcoming a lot, adjusting, I will keep moving, I'll keep adjusting, I'll keep believing, you finally have a breakthrough. To receive a return on failure, number 5, encourage others with your failures. Earlier in this teaching, I talked about writing the book Failing Forward, and my wife, halfway off of the ship, looking and saying, I love the book because you're so candid about your failures. She said they're going to identify with you. And here's what I have discovered. I have discovered that is very true. If you want to impress people, talk about your success. But if you want to impact people, talk about your failures. I learned this when I was a very young leader. I was speaking at a conference, and it was a 2-day conference, and there were 4 speakers. Each speaker had a half a day each. I happened to be the last speaker on the second day. And the first speaker got up, and he did a great job, but really all he talked about was all the things he had done successfully, and so everybody was kind of encouraged by his success, and, we gave him a good hand. And that afternoon, the second guy in his business, he talked about all his success too. And wow, I thought, we've had an awful lot of success today. Surely those guys have had some losses and some misses, but they never talked about it.